Okay, we are live. Welcome, 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 and welcome, welcome. Two more welcomes for everybody out there, part of our continuing series where we interview reporters, writers, professors, activists, anybody on the left, anybody on the right, as long as they have clear thoughts and we want to provide their opinion and insight directly to you, unedited and unaltered. With us today, it is my privilege to have Professor Francis Benjamin from Washington State. He's the Information Systems Coordinator and Psychology Shop Supervisor. Although he's not technically a professor of psychology, he has more of a background in engineering and political science, but he works in the field. Is that roughly correct?
That's right. And then I do teach in the college business.
He has a BS in Electrical Engineering, 1985, University of Idaho, Biblical Studies, 1991, Ministry Training, Theological Studies, Psychology, and Political Science. So you're very well educated across a variety of disciplines. Again, the Information Systems Coordinator and Psychology Shop Supervisor. And this is how I found you. This was a presentation that I found online. It was the most in-depth presentation that explain the state of political polarization in America, in my opinion. I've been doing a lot of research, reading a lot of things. This is the best one for, if you know nothing, how do I explain it from step A to Z, that I found by far compared to anything. Now, there might be other stuff out there, but this is the only one I found online. The professor pointed out he had a new version we're going to look at today. So that's going to be kind of released today. What more about your background? I know I wasn't able to get a lot of it, but you have worked in engineering, you have a background in political science, you've worked in psychology, and now you have become a mayor. And I think you were telling me that you're doing what they taught us in college was called praxis. You're both on the research side and on the practical application side, which is kind of unique.
Correct, and really how I got into this was I've now been with the psychology department for 35 years, but if you go back 20 years, so after I'd been there 15 years, I got elected to the city council and was in Olympia, which is where the state capital is in Washington, and listening to the lobbyists' reports of what was going on among our legislators and some of the challenges and dysfunction and the lack of their willingness to come together to find the best solution. And that's when I said, there's got to be a better way. And I took my engineering, my psychology, teamed up with a good science professor that was Nick Leverage, who was on an earlier slide, who's now emeritus. And we've been doing this research since then, in particular in the legislative area. There's a lot of research that's at the congressional, but we're looking more at the legislative. What are the things that will create civility? What are things that are creating instability? And then how do we help get legislators to work more collaboratively? With myself being on city council for 13 years and now being elected mayor, I also do very much have a local government bent also, where I want to help local government also be successful.
So that's I just want to point out, of all the people I've interviewed, there's very few who are in the research side and in the meat and potatoes side, like actually working in politics and government in the sausage factory. So you're going to have some unique perspectives. Yeah. To borrow that comes from the 1930s when they tried to explain what democracy was. And they go, well, it's kind of like a sausage factory. You like the end product. You may not want to look how it's made. It won't necessarily delight you as a beautiful thing. I find that analogy still very apt these days. Before we get into the presentation, which is the big thing, could you take a second? I want to personalize this before we get into the data and statistics and logic. You saw political polarization in your life. You have been around a while, no offense. You have been involved in politics. Sounds like you're saying you noticed things weren't working at some point in the last couple of years. Could you tell us about when it became clear to you, hey, it wasn't always like this in America. We used to get along, and damn, when did it get this bad? What did you see, either something that personally happened to you or something you saw on TV or the radio that struck you? Is there a moment, or can you describe moments when you go, oh, no, something's shifting here?
Well, really for me, it was when I was, when I was in Olympia, as a local government person, and in local government, you really have to work collectively. You can't burn bridges because the next project you're working on, that person that you don't need today is the person that you're going to need tomorrow to really be able to accomplish what you need to do at the local government side. But as I was watching the legislative process, I realized that they didn't operate the same way. And so in some ways it was a bubble burst where I thought people went and actually tried to work collaboratively, but found that wasn't the case. Now in the research that Nicholas and I have done, one of the things we did do is we went to the old timers, and they have an old timers event, in Olympia where the former legislators come back as a part of it, and talking with them and hearing their stories was very different in how they work compared to now. And so that's the thing. That's when we started looking and going, okay, what has changed? And so our research, a lot of our research is around what has changed, and within it we'll talk about some of those different points of what has changed in the process and in the people and how people relate to each other. That is what caused that.
Roughly what year was that where you had that epiphany?
Oh, so this would have been about 20 years ago. So it would have, really been around, 2000, 2001.
Oh, wow. So you were noticing political polarization all the way back around 2001.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. That's very important because a lot of people have said everything was perfect until Donald Trump came, and then in 2016 he broke the whole thing. And I like talking to professors who were saying, no, there were systemic problems way before that.
There are, and there's different strategies that people use. And there is strategies that are strategic instability, and there's some people that use instability as a strategy. There's other people that use instability in order to create gridlock, in order to prevent something from happening. So so just because someone's being incivil doesn't necessarily mean it's a personal thing. It could be their strategy in order to accomplish something else. So you have to understand those aspects also.
Okay. All right, well, let's get into it. This is I'm not sure if this is the cover page, but if you want to find something similar to this now, this is the older presentation. It has been updated, and we're going to be showing you slides from the new presentation. Here's the first slide. What is this slide explaining to us, Professor?
What this one is looking at, people really fall into one of four groups right now when it comes to how they react to politics. You have, if we start on the left-hand side, you have those that want to go back to the golden age when everybody worked together, and in their mind there was this golden age. So all they do is focus on, they just want to go back. The next one, this is where I take drawing a line in the sand, where someone has picked this topic and they basically said, I'm going to draw a line in the sand. I'm not going to cross this line regardless of anything, and I'm not even going to work with you. The next one over are the individuals that they just want to avoid politics. I was just at a family Thanksgiving, and when you walk in, there's a sign on the door that says, we do not want to talk about politics over Thanksgiving dinner. And you walked in the house because they don't want to go there. They want to avoid it. And then there's the small group that I have at the very end that are ones that realize that no one individual, no one group has all the solutions, that's the best solution. And so what they're saying is we want to find a way to work collaboratively. This for the good of our city, for our state, for our country.
So go back to good old times, work to make it better, avoid it altogether, or draw a line in the sand. And those are the 4 types of responses, it seems,
Yes.
that you're saying. Okay. And I've certainly heard about that, people wanting to avoid discussing politics now. All right, let's take a look. Oh, give me 1 second. It's going to change screen. Okay. What is this showing us, Professor?
What this one is, and this is a poll that was done in 2019. It was surveying Americans, but those that experienced instability, 84% had that experience. At the same time that 75% were saying it's actually a crisis level. So those that are describing when it comes to instability that they feel it's getting worse and that it's hit this point that's really a crisis level. And so what this speaks to is there's enough frustration among the general individuals that they really want politicians to find a solution to this and not just propagate instability.
75% think that incivility has risen to crisis levels. Is that correct?
Correct.
Wow. And 56%, or over half, expect incivility to get even worse. Is that right? I think that's what that's saying, 56%.
Yeah,
Wow.
yes,
Startling numbers. Okay. What is this showing us?
and with this one, this just kind of continues along that. This was another poll that was done, around how concerned are people around the negative tone, and whether or not they feel that negative tone and lack of stability is going to lead to more violence or acts of terror. And you'll see those that are concerned and very concerned make up 79%. So once again, over 3/4 of the population, they're expressing concern of the direction things are going, what they expect is going to happen.
All right, so another poll showing a very high percentage, around 3/4 of American people are bothered by the level of incivility in politics. What is this one showing, Professor?
And this is another one where, and this is more recent one. So this is one looking at since the last president was elected, and so we're now getting into a presidential election, but this previous, but saying those that did they feel that the relationship with the building. There's during politics. There's a lot of conversations that happen around. We're going to work with the other side. If elected, I'm going to reach across the aisle. I'm going to work in a collaborative way. And yet, what you're seeing is a 41% feel that there's been a decrease. Now, granted, you have a quarter, 21% say it has gotten better, but most of them are saying that it's still getting worse as opposed to working collaboratively.
Right, but if we add the improved at 21% to the unsure at 3%, that's under 25%, which means 3/4 of Americans don't feel it's improved at all. Is that a fair summary?
Correct.
Wow. Okay. What is this showing us?
So this is going back to Al Sutophill, a book that talks about when listening from any of the other countries. And so he actually went to visit, trying to understand what made America different. And this is where, within this, he noticed that there was these rules, norms, traditions, this respect for civility that was there, and within it, he felt that there is this standard that kind of brought people together originally that was around these norms, civility, and working collaboratively. Now, has it always been the case? No, but he was saying with this formation, this grand experiment that was America, really was based on that.
Interesting. Alexis de Tocqueville was a Frenchman who came to America in the 1830s and described life. So he's a go-to for a lot of historians and sociologists trying to understand the early American mind. What is this showing us?
This is really when people talk about going back to the good old days when we all got along. This is actually showing that there were and there have been points of instability and trends around instability. This is talking about brawls that happened in Congress, both on the House floor and also in the Senate, where there were fistfights that broke out. There were a gun pulled, one senator on another senator. Now, the interesting thing is most of these, if you look at this time period, this is really around your Civil War time period.
Thank you.
And it's really around the debates that were going on around slavery.
I've heard this, people were in civil. There was a guy who beat another man with a cane on the floor of the Senate or the House. And I said, but how many times did that happen? Only once. And usually these events were right before the Civil War. It's not, my understanding is it's not sprinkled throughout history. We had a lot of violence right before things got really bad.
Yeah.
Okay. And let's go here. Polarized politics in the 1920s. Sounds like we also had some polarization in the 1920s.
We have it sprinkled throughout, and if you look, it obviously is around certain things. You're around civil rights. There was around immigration, concerns about who was coming in versus who was already there, and then you also had around voting and also around alcohol. So there's different touch points that oftentimes this polarization will circle around.
So we've had periods of polarization, at least the 1860s, 1920s before now. Then the famous 1960s. Was the 1960s a polarized time?
Well, and that's where you're seeing this too, around war, around civil rights, women's rights. You once again you see this that there are things that really are touch points that will set people off. We have to understand that even today there's certain things that are touch points that we have to figure out in the midst of these passionate topics. How do we still work to in a collaborative way?
That's the Vietnam War, women's fight for equal rights in the top right corner. The bottom left corner is the famous sit down at the segregated lunch counter, I believe led by students from Fisk University, or it was a top university there in the South, where the professor had studied Gandhi. And then, of course, Martin Luther King leaving a famous march with other pastors later on. The last few years. How have the last few years been, Professor? Everything's totally fine, no problems?
Depends where you live.
Fair enough.
We have issues around the environment. We have issues around health with COVID. We have issues, once again, around cultures and whether or not cultures and races feel that they are being treated respectfully or not. These are just highlighting, just so we think about this context. I'm trying to put in context different things that have been going on so that we can understand the stability and the trends that are going on.
So we're looking at climate change, city riots out of BLM itself, and then all the masking, especially masks on children. No comment. The cyclical nature of political instability in the U.S., a very well documented phenomenon. Of course, the world famous Peter Turchin. What is this showing us, Professor?
So, and this is, because people talk about, are we at the worst when it comes to stability? Does it get better? Does it get worse? But what it actually shows is we've had two different cycles that have gone on. The first cycle that in this age of discord, one that really ends with the Civil War starting, and then what happens coming out of the Civil War, because of what happened in the Civil War, people then said, we really got to find ways to work collaboratively, come back together, and that started. And then you're seeing we're on this red line that's coming back up again with this next era, really, of this discord that's going on.
Right. So what I'm seeing is that we had World War II really brought the country together, but its effect has been dissipating. And when we go to the year 2005, the political stress index has risen to the point where it matches the drop in good feelings coming off the World War II era. So what we're seeing there is that we're going into the age of discord part 2, and it is only getting worse. Am I interpreting that correctly?
Correct. And so for those of us, if we think about during our lifespan, if you go back to when we were first born, it was better off than it is now if we're looking at stability. So in some ways that golden age is true if we think back to, for most people.
And it seems to be a sharp curve. Like once the curve starts turning, it seems to go up dramatically. There's not a big gap between 1840 and 1855. I mean, that curve is going up really fast, and we're seeing the same pattern repeated roughly from 2000 to 2010. It's a very stark jump. It looks like, and last time it led to a civil war. Is it wildly crazy to suggest that when that second red line gets to where the first red line was, that we may have another civil war?
I don't know if it'll lead to the civil war, but what it's going to continue to increase until there is a significant event that causes people to come together and say, okay, there's something bigger than what I am basing my decisions on, and help me overcome that, so that I'm actually going to work. We have to find ways to work in a collaborative way.
A superordinate threat is the term that's been introduced to me. World War II's coming. Hitler and the Nazis and the Japanese Imperial Army will take us over. Okay, guys, we got to put aside our differences so that we're not invaded. And I've seen that held up as another way to get us out of this problem. The issue I have is that we had 9/11, and we were together as a nation for 1 or 2 years, and then we split into camps very quickly. We had COVID. We split into camps very quickly, while most of the rest of the world did not. And then we had the Ukraine war, and which was against the arch rival of America for years, and then we split into 2 camps very quickly. So we seem to be splitting when we have superordinate threats, not coming together, at least the last couple of years. Perhaps the next World War III, Civil War will be different. What is this showing us, this?
Yeah, this is looking at similar information with, similar to this age of discord, but this is looking at the political stress index. And see that it's following this exact same line, this political stress index, as you saw with the Nations of Discourse. I was just showing other data that's showing the same thing.
Interesting. Declining trust in American political institutions. This is something I've routinely been covering. We used to have a public that believed in their government, and Nixon seemed to really drop that down, and it's just never really seemed to recover from there. What is this chart showing us, Professor?
And that's really what that's showing is that we're in this decline, and this trust in government, this is federal government. The next slide you have actually breaks out federal government to state and also local, because you're saying that the federal government has definitely lost. This is Gallup poll with this trust confidence in government, where the lowest line is the federal government, the next one up is the state government, the next one up is local. That where local government has retained a trust level. Historically, the state up until about 20 years ago still maintained a pretty high level. It's still doing better than federal, but you're seeing this decline happening among trust in state government. And so this is the one that you really look at in my mind. And part of it is I am a local government official, so I want to work really hard as it relates to distrust in government. But this is where I really feel that the solution is not necessarily something that's going to come from congressional federal side, because the general population has lost that trust. That if for us to make a change to actually increase trust, it's going to have to be something that comes out of the local government or the state government in order to make it happen.
Interesting. 2004 seems to be a big year for a drop. For a drop in confidence in the federal government, according to this chart. It looks like things were going up and down, but then 2004 we just took a hard decline.
Yeah, and we have some wars in there.
Right, the Iraq War.
If you start thinking about what was happening during those times, I think you had some people that we had this bump with 9/11, but then what's precipitated after that is the drop.
1 second, we're going to go to the next slide. What is this showing us?
Yeah, and so this one is looking at the voting pattern for the House of Representatives. So understand this context that I'm trying to weave has to do with how we got where we're at, and you're seeing that over time, if you look at the 1950s, how the voting patterns were more spread across the color spectrum. If you would say red versus blue, to now you get down to the 2011, how there really is this separation to where it's not very often that someone crosses the aisle and votes different than their party.
According to this, it looks like, just me looking at this visually, we had some serious breakaways starting in 1967, and then it was complete by 1979.
Yeah.
Wow.
So you're seeing, so this is something, where when you're saying, oh, this happened just in the recent years, with certain presidents or elections,
right.
The House of Representatives, this is something that started earlier.
That's brilliant. Yeah, I liked how you were showing, you were saying that you noticed when I asked you personally, political polarization around 2001, and then this chart shows lack of trust in the federal government around 2004, roughly that time period. And then we can go to this one. second, showing there was some polarization was hardcore, at least by 1979. Those are, and I've heard the 1970s, I've heard the 2000s, certainly not way before the Trump era. What is this showing us?
Yeah, and this is another one. It's the Pew Research. This looking at that rise of the polarization, and what this is, Republicans' attitude about the Democrat Party and the Democrats' attitude about the Republican Party, and you'll see that there's this unfavorable or very unfavorable attitude that's increased. There's been an increase of, over a third in each of these areas, since 1994. And then you're getting into how people, the kind of the heuristics where no longer is it my neighbor's Republican, but I know my neighbor instead. Everybody that's Republican is close-minded, or everybody that's Democrat
Right.
is close-minded. So you're seeing this heuristic that's starting to happen, where no longer are you seeing people individually, but you're attributing attributes to them based on just their party alignment.
And we can see in the mid 1990s, the amount of people in both parties who had an unfavorable view of the other was about 20% or less, about a fifth. And now it's closer to 2/3. That's not good. I'm looking at the chart on the left. What is this showing us?
And this is kind of continuing along that line with this gets into stress as it relates to talking about people in politics. You're saying that is when talking of politics, is it generally stressful and frustrating, or is it interesting and informative? And you're seeing how there's this separation that's happening where more and more people are seeing it as stressful and frustrating, as opposed to something that is interesting and informative.
Yeah, we've definitely switched. So if you can go back to 2016, a minority of the population, 46%, thought it was stressful and frustrating, and now it's a clear 2/3 majority. And then it was slightly over half found politics interesting, and now it's dropped down to 40%, where they're a clear minority. So not good signs. And over a relatively short period of time frame. I mean, we're looking at 2016 to 2021. That's basically just the Trump term seems to have dramatically stressed everyone out.
Some things where you're just attributing.
And you have a lot of great data showing this starting at different eras, 1970, 2000, and then 2016. I think this is a continuation of that.
And this is like about, have you stopped talking to somebody about political news? But it's getting into there is an increase in avoidance of talking anything politics, and because of that avoidance of politics, political news, that avoid what you no longer have these discussions where it's nuanced and you understand that there's a lot of different issues related to it, but instead my group and that group, and there's this separation that's happening because of it, because you're not having that interaction.
What is this telling us?
So this was talking about the National Conference of State Legislators. There's two different conference of state legislators. But in 2011, they were seeing this happening among the different state legislatures. So as a part of it, they passed the Civility Accord that said, as legislators, there should be a respect for the right for all American people to avoid the rhetoric that humiliates, to strive to understand the different perspectives. And so this is something that, as a conference, they were trying to
That was in 2011. National Conference of State Legislatures felt that incivility was so bad they needed to issue these guidelines in 2011. I've seen this before. Could you tell the audience what this is?
Yeah. So, and what we have this in the context is during the 2020 governor's campaign in Utah, the two candidates actually came together and did a couple different videos that were then shown with them together as a part of the campaign, saying, even though we disagree with each other, that whoever wins, we will support them because they won. And this was something that was really highlighted as very new and refreshing, that people were willing to campaign, but also willing to, whoever the people vote in, say, we will support that candidate and recognize that candidate.
One of the interviews I did, one of the professors said the key to democracy is being a good loser. You're willing to accept that you lost the election. I mean, yeah. Okay, this is the National League of Cities on the front line of today's cities: trauma, challenges, and solutions. What is this showing us?
Yeah, so within this is a theory study that was done. This report that was put out. This is just one of the two of the figures from that report, where they were looking at the local government level, have you noticed experience harassment, threat, violence, where you see 81% have said yes, that they have, and that it's actually changed, it's actually gotten worse, 87%. And within the study, you actually had 20% of the people said that it had gotten so bad that they were unlikely to serve out the rest of their term.
Wow.
And from a local government side, I've seen this, and I know even in the state of Washington, we've had incidents of violence against local elected officials, and in fact, we had, in one situation, one person didn't like what the mayor was doing, and so they went and poured gasoline on the porch, lit the porch on fire while the mayor was in their house. And so you have, local governments that are individuals that are, more and more concerned about their safety, their family safety, and because of that, they're actually getting out of politics because, in their mind, it's not worth the risk. Which is really a bad thing, because we need our best and brightest involved at all levels of politics if we're really going to have our best solution.
What year did that report come out? Trauma Challenges and Solutions by the NLC.
I think this is 2019, if I remember right.
Relatively recent.
So,
okay.
Yeah, I
all right.
Looked at that one. I can't remember the date just off the top of my head.
Okay, what is this telling us?
And this is, so, within my presentation, I break it into three parts. One is the historical trends, one is my research, and the last is recommendations. And with this is, if we look at kind of what are the takeaways from historical trends, is that there are cycles. It shows that there are cycles within this, that we're really at the worst point of a long one right now. The second thing is cycles can be broken. And not that I want another civil war, but there are, cycles can be broken in order to bring it back. But then the last one is that local government and community is going to be the key. And that's my feeling, because the level of trust is still there at the local government level. That if the local government starts the campaign around, we need to work in a collaborative way, we need to be civil, that's something that the community will listen to more than they will if it comes from a state legislature or comes from Congress.
So the federal government's too polarized. The best way to bring the country back together is to focus on the local government, maybe state, because there's at least some level of trust there. Okay.
Now we still need, at the federal side, I think the federal side can influence other federal elected officials, but I don't think it's going to influence the community and the average citizen as much as the local government.
Interesting. What is this telling us?
So this gets into my civility research, and it starts back where you can see back in 2008, which is when I started doing a lot of this research around looking at collaboration, how people treat other people around politics, and my research within legislative ability, and then this last one is the national survey that we did in 2018-19, and we're actually in the process of gathering data again this year. So we're doing a follow-up with it. And the outside looking into the book that I was the co-editor on, that is this research around the National Survey of State Legislative Lobbyists, where we looked at the reason why we survey lobbyists is from our previous work we've done. We found that lobbyists are more likely to answer surveys than elected officials are. But elected officials are more focused on getting reelected, and they don't, they don't want to answer something that could negatively impact their reelection.
Right.
The lobbyists actually have a very, what we found is the lobbyists have a very good and perspective and view that's very accurate from research that we've done where we surveyed legislators, staffers, lobbyists in that way. So we focused on the lobbyists. We're in the process now. We put a call out to the 200 lobbyists in each state. So 10,000. So there's a lot of lobbyists that we're trying to get data from. Although it's harder and harder to get people to be willing to participate in research.
Interesting. And this was the research team?
This is the research team that brought together and did the survey of the lobbyists.
Okay. A lot of people from a variety of universities.
Yes.
And what is this showing us?
So what this is now getting into our civility research, where what we've looked at is just a perspective of how important is civility viewed, and you'll see that the left-hand graph, which is how important it is, and you'll see that they actually see it very high of how important it is. At the same time, the one on the right shows the difference for we surveyed legislators that had served prior to 2000 and also after 2000. And so you're seeing that the importance of civility is declining among our elected officials. So those that were elected pre-2000 held civility in a higher regard than those that were elected after 2000.
And this data comes from this report?
This data is from the Washington State Legislative Survey Project. So if you go back where you were,
No.
forward 2 slides, sorry. So if you look at the second one, the Washington State Legislative Survey Project, the 2009, 12, 13, the top graph is one where in that one we surveyed both legislators and also lobbyists and also staffers. And so if we go forward to the graph, that those graphs are showing here. So the graphs are showing for the legislative lobbyist perspective from the data point. And then if you look on the left side below the graph, you'll see some numbers. Those numbers are actually related to the lobbyist, the nationwide lobbyist one, where we looked at what was in 2018-19 the national average, and then what was it for Washington State. And we also identified Wisconsin was the state that held the least value of civility, South Carolina the highest value of civility. The perspective was on the law.
Interesting. Okay, what is this showing us?
And this is our legislators, becoming more partisan or bipartisan. Are they willing to work more in a bipartisan fashion? Like you'll see Maryland was the state that's going for the most bipartisan. Nevada was the one that was the least bipartisan or the most partisan. And then below is compared to 10 years ago, our legislators more or less double. They'll speak to Mexico felt that has held on to their stability from 10 years, similar as 10 years ago, whereas Maine is seen as much less civil than it was 10 years ago.
Wow. So it's spreading across the country. What is this showing?
And this one is related to gridlock, where Congress is really seen as high levels of gridlock, and so our legislators reflecting that same gridlock as U.S. Congress. And from a strongly agree to strongly disagree, you'll see that the national average 1.81 is definitely they agree the legislators are moving more into that gridlock format, with Kentucky leading the way of the most polarized as it relates to gridlock and the
Wow.
and then we also were looking at within politics, you have areas that are partisan and areas that are seen as nonpartisan. Historically, like transportation is not seen as partisan, whereas social programs would be seen as partisan. And so one of the questions we asked is, do you have the same amount, or is it decreasing? And you're seeing that across the country, the nonpartisan areas are shrinking and are moving to becoming partisan.
Interesting. Map of state incivility index. I like that.
Yeah. So this is based on the lobbyist perspective, and what you'll see with this is the darker the states are the most double, the lighter the states the least double. So you see Utah, Maryland, and Massachusetts as the most double, North Carolina, Oklahoma, and Arizona as the least double. And this would have been at that time point of 2018, 2019.
Wow.
So with our follow-up study, we're really interested to see is that shifting or is this pretty much staying?
Interesting. Legislators from safe districts occasionally behave too forcefully. Legislative testimony, much more subjective and less based upon fact now. There's considerable amount of performing for the camera. In the same way that the political parties have moved to the left and to the right nationally, that is happening in Washington too. There was less middle ground visible to both sides today. The statesman is all but extinct. Contemporary legislators seem much more concerned with pending elections and mere appearances than in crafting good public policy. Younger lobbyists, legislators, and staff do not fully respect the institution of the legislature. These are just some of the comments from the lobbyists explaining how it's getting bad. Is that correct?
Right. Yeah, and this is within Washington State, and we have comments from varying states. So when we do presentations in the different states, we'll actually pull those state lobbyists on.
Fair enough. Fair enough. One second. Okay. Okay, what is this saying to us?
So what we then looked at is, as we were looking at civility factors under research, we identified groupings of civility factors. Our first one is related to between elected leaders. We then have another factor that is related to leadership, another one related to process, and then a last one related to external factors. So we're finding that between elected leaders, what we're seeing is the changes that are going on is One is understanding there's this process from the time you meet somebody to where you then respect them, you have similar interests, similar values, is a friend, trust, and confide in them. And understand there's this process that needs to happen to build those relationships among people you don't know. What we have found is that as it relates to relationships, there's been a decrease. When we talk to the old timers, they talk about the families getting together, legislators, when they're there during legislative sessions, across the aisle, having meals together, visiting. You don't have that piece. And some of it that went on is a change in, I'll talk about the change in transportation, during transportation, is it's easier for legislators to commute in to do their work. It used to be legislators would relocate to the state capitol and they would live there for 3 months, which meant their kids were playing basketball on the same team there, and so they would go and so they would have these interactions, these family interactions, where you're cheering on kids that are from a legislator across the aisle. Nowadays, we have a high percent of our legislators that commute on a daily basis, so they drive in, meet at their community meetings, and then leave, and they have none of those outside breakfasts, dinners at all. And
Right.
They're really separating themselves.
Right.
So there's that piece, and then this last one that I referenced this earlier, the strategic instability, where some legislators, they're not being incivil because they're mad at the person, but they use strategic instability. So if I get mad and blow up and yell at a person over something, then the next time they're thinking about doing something that I might not like, then they'll hold off and say, do I really want to face that person blowing and yelling at me again? And so they avoid. So it's a strategic way to get people to do what you want because they don't want to face that instability.
Interesting. It's not that they're actually mad; it's they're using it to get what they want.
Right. And then from the leadership side, what we're finding is that's where to think about the House of Representatives, where the votes are more and more all party line votes. That you see that the leadership is one that is actually creating a lot of this, and that the leadership doesn't want the legislators to cross the aisle because leadership is trying to accomplish what they want to accomplish in order to keep their party in power or get their party in power. And that's where their focus is, as opposed to what's the best solution. So within that, if it's done right, there should be majority rule and minority voices heard, and that way. We also found that when we looked at the vote preparation, that during the times in which, and this is going to be related to Washington State in particular, the times where the vote between the majority was closer to the minority, where there's a smaller separation, they actually work together more civil because there's a greater chance that if somebody from the majority jumped over to the minority, then they wouldn't have enough votes to be able to get it through. And so there was more collaborative work that was going on during that narrow vote separation. The other pieces that we're seeing that we saw this is that there's been a growth in complexities of the legislative process. That historically, our legislators have been part-time legislators, but your legislators, because of the complexity of the process, are really moving into being professional legislators or full-time legislators, where in addition to work during the legislative session, outside of the legislative session, they're still, with all the meetings they're attending and the trainings they're doing, they're still at least half time or three-quarter time for it. And so we're seeing this complexity piece is increasing the committees, if the leadership of the committee is one that works in a bipartisan civil way, a lot of work gets done that is not foreseen in the committees. There's a disability that steps up. And the last is this ideological differences, where, and that's where I talk about that line drawn in the sand, where rather than looking for consensus or compromise, they just draw a line in the sand and say, I don't want to talk to you about anything, even though there may be some points that you could agree on and actually get something done, even though you don't cross the line.
Okay.
So that's the leadership. And then for external, we're finding that technology changes have definitely changed stability. The first one that I talked about is prior to Washington State televising their legislative process, that prior to that, they actually had a cake in their lunchroom. And so the legislators would have a beer or two at lunch. So the afternoon sessions got a little raucous, but they were actually jovial in that way. By adding in technology and televising, what it's done is it formalized the process. So the legislators are less likely to they're more formal and less likely to be camaraderie. And where legislators will talk about is they might be sitting in a committee meeting and they lean over to talk to somebody next to them, and then they will get an email from constituents saying, "Why are you talking to the enemy?"
Right.
Because they crossed the line. So you'll see
right.
this. So the conversations that used to happen, they're not happening because they're in this fishbowl of technology. So we're seeing that that's definitely a factor that's changed it. In crisis disasters, that's where just recognize that change dynamics and things can get better or worse in the midst of that. We're seeing that the campaign cycle really becomes a permanent campaign cycle, and so they're really focused on re-election as opposed to the work that they need to do. And then the last thing is that one of the things that we found a correlation with had to do with we looked at how civil the legislature was perceived versus how the individual was treated during the campaign process. And we found that there's a direct correlation between legislators that are elected in a campaign process that is very possible that use the legislature in that possible frame. And will relate to the other legislators, even though they weren't part of the hostility, they will relate in the same way. And this is where one of the things that we said is you really have to, once the election happens, there needs to be a process where you bring the legislators together and they get to know the legislators as individuals. Otherwise, they bring that hostility into the legislative session itself, and it's a detriment.
Okay. All right. We did that. Okay.
And what this lessons learned is that the relationship piece is what we found to be. If anything that you can do to help legislators see each other as individuals and work as individuals is going to be critical and key to understand stability is declining and that it is having a negative effect on our policy outcome. That our legislators are not accomplishing the best work because of that decline.
Okay. All right. We're winding down. We got a few more minutes. I want to try to finish out the slides. Recommendations. We have 2 pages of recommendations. What are they saying?
Yeah. So this is back to local government. The first main recommendations are on physical safety. Local government is the closest government to the people. People elected officials, you need to make sure that you get here. So that piece. Your next slide is the other two areas that are recommended around recommendations. So you have the second slide. You want to bring it up?
Okay, let's go to this one.
So your next slide with these, and this is from the National League of Cities, is the mental health and well-being. So recognizing the negative impact, the impact on the mental health of our elected officials, this instability piece, and then the last part related to civil discourse of what are the ways in which we can work to improve civil discourse with modeling civility, engaging the community, having a code of conduct. Most elected officials, you have a code of ethics, but that code of ethics is really around fiduciary responsibilities, as opposed to a code of conduct that is how you relate to individuals, how you relate to the community, how you relate to staff, how the community relates to staff, and the importance of having a code of conduct in addition to a code of ethics.
Interesting.
I hope this is helpful.
Oh, it's very helpful. And
then similar to with those recommendations from the research, this is once again looking at, first of all, modeling civility. Is focus on the relationship. Understand that civility does not require agreement. So if you can disagree in a civil way, and then also this context of intellectual humility, where intellectual humility is something where the intellectual part is I've done my research, I have very strong beliefs, but the humility side is even though I've done all my homework, there may be something I missed. And
right.
So the humility is I'm open to additional information.
Right.
And so it's not drawing the line in the sand and saying I was willing to talk about it. Is being willing to say, hey, even though I disagree with you, let's have this dialogue so we can get more information between each other. It may not change what I believe, but I'm more focused on you as an individual, and I want to understand why you believe what you believe. So it's that building that relationship. The next one is that code of conduct that I talked about is not just having a code of ethics, but also a code of conduct of what is and what isn't allowed relates to behavior. How do you make sure that there's a comfortable, inclusive space? And then part of what happens in this is it removes that power struggle. Because if someone, and I talk about that strategic instability, they go into that strategic instability rather than you battling against them on the strategic instability. Instead, you have a code of conduct that says that action is not proper, and so it actually removes that power struggle between the elected officials so they can point to code of conduct.
Interesting.
Then this transition from campaigns, this is where I talked about the impact that native campaigns have. So you really need to have this newly elected training in order to break that cycle so that people don't carry the baggage from the campaign.
Right.
Other people based on that. This one on the minority perspective is, and this is one that I think is a very interesting piece. If you think about social norms and mores, the majority rules, but there's an expectation that the majority rules in a civil way.
Right.
For the minority, their perspective is it's okay for their voice to be heard. They're even though they're not going to rule, they still have the opportunity for their voice to be heard. But it's socially acceptable if the minority doesn't feel that their voice is heard, for them to act out in a way for their voice to be heard. So we get in this perspective, and it's an interesting one because I said who is in the minority, and with some of the research I've done, I've asked individuals example, and I'll use an example. I'll ask somebody that is a Republican in the state of Idaho, so it's a very red state, and I'll say, is your party in the minority, or is your party in the majority? And the vast majority of them will say no, because they don't look at local level, they don't look at state level, they look at national level. And if they're not in the president's office, they actually consider themselves in the minority. And so you have situations where someone who is in the majority of the state actually acts out like they're in the minority. Because in their mind, so that's why I said this minority perspective. Sometimes when someone does something,
okay.
Or even though you're in the majority right now of your state, you actually think you're in the minority, so you're acting like you're in the minority and able to act out when you really shouldn't be acting out.
Okay.
Social norm.
Okay.
So it's an interesting. So we're seeing some interesting aspects of it.
Interesting. We are running out of time. We're not going to be able to touch all these. I'm sorry. So,
not a problem.
I'm not sure. We have this one. We can do this one.
Okay. So this one is just repeating. So as it relates to strategic instability, one of the things that we found is there are certain groups that actually don't want government, so they want limited government.
Right.
And so their solution to limited government is to actually cause instability or chaos, because if there is gridlock, nothing gets done. And I've had these conversations where I talk about, this is what I'm trying to do in order to get people to reach across the aisle and work together, find what is the best solution. And they're like, no, we don't want that, because we don't want any solution.
Right.
Nothing to be done.
The Tea Party.
So really what I'm trying to do is when we're getting into this instability, understand there's all these different dynamics that are going on. And this is that preference for political dysfunction.
Right.
And so
that makes a lot of sense.
Their action is to cause dysfunction, because then nothing gets done. And so you just understand that there's a whole lot of different groups and perspectives that are at work. And so stability is a very complicated thing. And that's what I'm trying to help people see.
That's fascinating. I found the part where the book was talking about trauma and legislators dealing with trauma fascinating. Okay, winding down. Thank you for being here. Awesome presentation, super in depth. Last two questions. You're not you. You're not me. You're a third-party person who's going to watch this interview. They're going to go, wow, I learned a lot. But they're struggling to remember it all. But it's 5 days after they've watched this interview, and they go, while I'm struggling to remember it all, there was this one thing the professor said, and it's 5 days after the presentation, and I can't stop thinking about that one thing. What would that statement be?
What I would hope it would be is this context of when I'm relating to an individual, that my relationship with the individual is more important than the topic that we're discussing, because the topics are going to change, but that relationship is always there. And I might be in the majority now on the current topic, but the next time I'm relating to the person, I might be in the minority. And I'm going to want for them to listen to what I have to say. So to think in the relationship context, I think is the thing that we need to do. Think neighbors.
The most important thing. That's good. Last question. You don't have to answer, but we always ask. Do you know anybody who might be willing to be part of a conversation like this? Anybody in academia? Any activists? You don't have to name anybody, but we always try to keep the conversation going. Is there any recommendations you have for people we could reach out to?
Well, you saw the group that collaborated with me on this project.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
There's a number of those. Within the book, my co-editors, they all have very good, other perspectives, and are looking at it in different ways. Because part of what we're doing with the book is we're actually trying to tease out why the different states are acting in different ways. So we're actually looking at when you look at that map of the state, we're saying, well, is this because of ranked choice voting, certain types of voting, or is it because of gerrymandering, or is it because of the actual system that's set up within the legislature, or how, is it based on how far apart the majority is from the minority? So we're actually running a lot of dynamics right now around that, and those could be great topics for you to kind of follow a little bit.
That's
related to this map.
Oh, here they are. Okay. Thank you. That is fantastic. I'm going to try to reach out to these people. Thank you so much. I know we've done one with your partner on the presentation, but wow, that's a lot of Arkansas, Kansas, Idaho, Illinois, Oregon, Utah, Ohio, Nevada, Pennsylvania, North Carolina, Washington. Wow. Okay, that's a variety of states. That's great.
There's a lot of people there that you can reach out to, and each one is, and they have different areas that they're focused in.
That's fantastic. Okay, we'll leave it there. I want to say thank you for your time, and thank you for your passion project. You're really providing a lot of breakdown of information I haven't found elsewhere. I think the public needs to understand this topic, and I think the work you've done I found is rare. I don't see many people putting together PowerPoints in public for the average person to understand how bad it is and fully digest it. And I think your work is excellent, in depth, and available for public consumption. And I don't see that out there that much. So I wanted to say congratulations and thank you.
I've enjoyed being here.
Okay, I will send you a copy of the video in a few hours. And I want to say thank you for your time, Professor.
You're welcome.
Okay.